Flying has got immensely safer as a result of reflecting on accidents and near misses and having checklists to ensure practice is taken part. Medicine's improved enormously through randomized controlled experiments, through systematic reviews, through guidance based on that information. Building has got immensely safer because of building regulations that embed the science into practice. And does this work? So here's a review of nursing. They looked at over 600 studies where people compared evidence-based practice versus standard good nursing practice. And if you have evidence-based practice, in 90% of the time, it's beneficial. It's statistically better. Fewer people die. More people get better. The other 10% was just not statistically significant. So what about conservation? Well, Andrea Santangeli, for his PhD, looked at the 10 actions that are being carried out for raptor conservation in Europe. 2 of them were negative, 2 of them had no effect, and the other 6 were beneficial, but very different in their cost effectiveness. And he showed that you could have the same impact for just 80% of the budget. And the return on investment in his PhD was about 300%. Learning, testing really pays. Another example, this is a standard being held in his hand, a standard nest box. There's a suggestion if you had long, thin nest boxes, crested tits would prefer them. So Ron Summers put up pairs of nest boxes. Curiously, apart from crested tits, in every case, the new nest box design was more popular. This is probably the most widely carried out intervention in the world, and birds don't really like them. So let's just say there's lots of other studies showing that there are problems. So we asked this question to the audience: how much money could you save if you had the same broad, if you had the published evidence and the experience of your organizations and all others? And the median answer that you came up with was 51 to 60%. So Bezos, instead of spending 10 billion, could spend 5 billion and get the same output. If what you're saying is right, we could double our effectiveness through using evidence into practice. So don't tell me it's not worth doing this. And then there's what about evidence and guidance? This is Dave Watson, who's the world expert on mistletoes. And I did a YouTube video in which I read him the RHS, Royal Horticultural Society, guidance on mistletoe in its entirety. And he showed that it's all contradicted by research. I told the RHS this. It was a slightly difficult email. But it's great. I'm absolutely delighted that they've looked at the evidence and put that into the reworked guidance. So harvest berries late in the spring, do it whenever they're soft and squishy. Make sure you pick the same type of tree. Well, actually, you don't need to match the tree. Pick a large branch, 4 inches in diameter. Pick a thin branch. Make a shallow flat cut to create a small flap. Don't cut the bark or create flaps. Insert the crevice or under the bark. Place them in well-lit areas. Cover with hessian. Don't cover the seed. And Harriet Downing did a review of the guidance, conservation guidance in the UK, 200 bits of guidance, and showed that in almost all cases, there was no clear link between the statements that were made and the evidence. It was very difficult to pair those two together. What about experimental designs? This is Alec Christie's work, who's at the back somewhere, looking at how accurate different experimental designs are. Do they give you the right answer? Is this better than this? And is it right to within 50%? So if you do a before-after controlled intervention, they're terrific. Do one, it's right to about 78% of the time. If you do lots of them, it's right sort of 90 plus, 95% of the time. Randomized controlled trials are great. Before and after, okay. Controlled interventions, okay. The after design, it's not very good. It's right about 17% of the time. If you do lots of them, because it's such a useless design, It's no better. It's like tossing a coin lots of times to give you the right answer. And this is the most common experimental design in conservation and social science. It's not actually as good as that. As Caroline's just described, very often there are multiple actions being carried out, and there are reasons for this. In monitoring and evaluation, there's a whole reasons for doing that. But if you want to find out what actions are effective, if you do a whole host of actions, then you can't work out which one's effective. And then, as Caroline described, there's biased reporting. You report the successful interventions. So it's likely that a lot of monitoring and evaluation being carried out in terms of learning out what works is a bit better than tossing a coin or a bit worse than tossing a coin. And then conservation organizations, big organizations, often say, well, we're not interested in the actions. We're interested in the board policies. So you might be an organization and you might have a climate change project and a biodiversity project and a business project, and that's what you do. But these make a difference because of the actions, because people are restoring peat bogs, they're putting trees in the ground, they're trying to change behavior, and that's what determines the outcome. So the effectiveness of your organization is the effectiveness of your actions. So you can't say, I'm above that. That doesn't work. So Tiago de Zoten made this useful table, and he's here, and he says that you can have organizations that take evidence seriously and look at the evidence, and that you can have organizations or for practices that don't look at the evidence, so a weak evidence base. And you can have organizations that have a good experimental design, or as we've just described, a weak experimental design. Now, if you've got a robust evidence base and a weak experimental design, as Caroline says, that's fine. That's just doing, that's applying what we know. If you've got a weak evidence base and a good experimental design, that's great. You're testing. We don't know if it works. We're going to find out. If you're a robust evidence base and you do another test, that's refining, just checking under new conditions. That's great. But what he points out is that most conservation, they don't look at the evidence beforehand, and they have a weak experimental design. So most conservation is best classified as guessing. So, and then final point I want to make is there's lots of terms for evidence use, and that's terrific. But something we've noticed increasingly is people claim evidence use, and when you actually ask how's evidence embedded in the organization, it's clear that it isn't. And Alec Christie suggests the term evidence washing for this practice. So I just want to say I know I've been a bit negative. Lots of conservation is delivering effective actions, but very often actions could be improved. The guidance we use is often poor. Monitoring often doesn't tell us anything. Evidence washing is an issue. Organizations are often above thinking they need to understand the actions, and a lot of it is best thought of as guessing. I just want to say the world is changing, and that's what this is going to be an upbeat talk. So for example, we have lots of evidence bases. We've got conservation evidence, we've got CEDA, metadata set, Panorama, Conservation Insight, and this is the big game changer, the living evidence database, the AI database that you'll hear about later. And we're progressing in using, in working on the knowledge of local indigenous people. So for example, Persuna collects local indigenous knowledge. We've shown that 35% of the literature is not in English, and we collate the English database, so you can have that. And this is a group of people coming together to work out how to bring different knowledge sources together. And that's very important. And some organizations have already done this. So Vincent Weir started by he wanted to know why otters were declining, and then he wanted to know what the reasons for that and what the effective measures were and how you test those. And Vincent Weir, right from the beginning, has embedded evidence and research into practice. You can do this. And we have evidence champions that have, as part of their practice, are ensuring that they use evidence they embed it into processes, and ideally they do tests too. So this can be done, and more organizations are doing this. And we're creating, and people are creating evidence-based guidance. Wetland International have been doing this, linking the research to the recommendations. We have evidence strategies, Natural England, the Woodland Trust. We have people increasingly wanting to know how you can learn about testing. This is CIEM workshop. And testing can be taken seriously. So the RSPB has done, as we'll hear later, have done over 100 tests of conservation actions across a range of habitats, a range of problems. And then funders have started to ask applicants, why do you think the thing you recommend is likely to work? These are funders that are actually doing this, which is just absolutely fabulous. And we think this is going to change the world. So if funders ask about evidence, they say it's easier for them to judge which actions are likely to be effective. You're likely to get better proposals because they've thought about the actions. We're likely to have a cultural change. If we have that, we're going to have more effective actions. We're going to have more effective organizations. If we have better actions, more effective organizations, they're likely to be more attractive for philanthropists to put more money in, because often they don't want to fund things that fields they think aren't effective. If you have more money and better actions, we're going to have a better world. I just want to say there are other ways in which other organizations help embed the evidence into decision-making. And then, so I think there's real change going on. So this is the standard Rogers diffusion curve about how change occurs. So there are innovators who are really making progress. There's Vincent Weir, just always been applying evidence. There's Mossy Earth providing funding for evidence. There's the RSPB providing testing. There's Whitley and Rufford that have innovated in terms of leading the way for funders in asking about evidence. They're early adopters, organizations like the Evidence Champions, that are really thinking hard about evidence and ensuring that's embedded into practice. And there's lots of organizations, many of you here online, that are interested in these practices. There's a lot of people, that are the early majority, that are thinking about evidence, and we hope that many of you, and encouraged by this conference, many of you will take it more seriously. The late majority, we hope, will come along soon, and often in this theory, the main contribution to the laggards to making progress is by going bankrupt or dying. I rather hope that isn't the case here and they come on board and actually improve things. So change does seem to be happening. So in conclusions, what can you do if you're not taking evidence seriously at the moment? If you're involved in practice, there's two questions you can ask. If it's some things are obvious or trivial, in that case, you don't want to look at evidence. But if it's not, what is the process by which you decide what to do? And if people talk about best practice, or we've always done this, then that's alarm bells. And then secondly, you say, has anything been done over the past year that will enable you to learn about the effectiveness of any action? Have your organization done anything that means you can learn about what works and what doesn't? Most organizations haven't done anything. And if you did those, it'd be a changer. And if you're a funder, you could ask applicants why they think their proposal will be effective. And that question is a complete game changer. So if you want to know more, I've done a video which briefly outlines it, and I put the references to this talk in that, if you want to look at that QR code. Thank you.